The world is getting louder, busier, and more crowded. Every second, nearly 3 more people are born. By the time this video ends, tens of thousands more will have joined us on the planet. It seems like the world will be overpopulated in no time. But is this the whole truth? In this video, we're diving into the complex story behind the truth of population, so make sure to stick around until the end. For decades, the great fear was of there being too many people. The 20th century brought with it a deep anxiety about overpopulation, a fear that Earth would be pushed beyond its limits. Books like The Population Bomb warned of global catastrophe, resources, space, and stability. Many believed these things would collapse under the weight of sheer human numbers. But first, to see how things have changed, let's start with an example. Death, despair, demise. Millions suffering alone from plague and famine, unable to reject the embrace of death. This is what characterized the Black Death, the devastating pandemic which rampaged through Europe from 1346 to 1353. The ancient metropolises of London, England, Siena, Tuscany, and Paris, France, and many others saw the decimation of up to 2/3 of their population. Even now, Europe has not forgotten about the Black Death. Areas known as ghost villages still scatter the French and German countryside, hoping to recover from the plague. From public sanitation to infrastructure design, Europe has not forgotten. The Black Death represents the historical tendency for greatness to be born, new from the ashes of tragedy. In its wake, a population reset fixed the structural problems resulting from high urban populations and low wages. The fatalities of the plague brought down the population, making labor more valuable, and thus raising the purchasing power of the middle classes. It is here we see the first example of the kind of tragedy that the world was thinking about in the 1960s. Around this time, a psychologist named John B. Calhoun ran a series of experiments that seemed to echo this fear. But he will become more important later in this video. However, this video is not to say that this narrative is completely false. Today, the story has shifted, though. The world's most developed nations are not facing a population boom, but a bust. Birth rates are dropping dramatically across the globe. Fewer people are choosing to have children, and entire societies are beginning to shrink. And it isn't at any slow rate or something worth celebrating. Take South Korea, for example. In 2024, its fertility rate dropped to just 0.72 children per woman, now the lowest in the world. Japan isn't far behind, with its aging population shrinking year after year. Italy, Spain, Germany, and even China now face similar challenges. Take a look at these images on the screen. These are population pyramids. A population pyramid is a graph that shows the age and sex distribution of a country's population. The left side shows males, the right side shows females, and each horizontal bar represents a different age group. A wide base means a lot of young people, typical of fast-growing populations. A narrow base with a wider top means an aging or shrinking population. Clearly, South Korea, despite being one of the most developed nations in the world, faces an aging population. But are the ones saying that we are overpopulated necessarily wrong? Do we, in fact, need to quote-unquote depopulate? All around the world, eco-environmental activists have been calling for deindustrialization and depopulation. And they have a point. Earth is absolutely on its way to be uninhabitable for humans in the very near future. So, are these people right? No, they're not. Absolutely not. Both the short-term and long-term consequences of a diminishing population are utterly terrifying. Underpopulation will be a cancer that spreads throughout society. It will, eventually, come to impact every human life on the planet. The youths of which there will be a limited amount of, will struggle to make ends meet for themselves and their families. Meanwhile, the elderly, of which there will be an overwhelming amount of, will struggle to make ends meet, as the youths cannot provide enough for them. From this, the cycle is born. The youths are worked harder or taxed higher to support the elderly, resulting in less opportunities for starting their own families. And then, there are less children to support them once they age. And so, the cycle continues. As time passes by, less and less of each generation will be supported, resulting in a systematic collapse in both human population and human livelihood. To combat this demographic decline, many nations are turning to immigration. It's a practical solution. New people bring energy, labor, tax revenue, even culture. But it also introduces an important societal question. In countries with strong ethnic or national identities, replacing the native population with immigrants sparks serious debate and question. So, do ethno-states have a right to preserve their demographic makeup? Or should the pursuit of diversity override traditional identity? Is cultural blending a strength? Or does it erode something fundamental? Let's move into the real world to discuss this real-world problem. If you've made it this far, it means you're probably enjoying my content, so be sure to go down and hit the subscribe button and like for future content. So let's jump right in. So I brought you here to the real world because this is an issue that I think is a very real world issue and has a lot of severe implications that go beyond just simple numbers. And it's just easier to say face to face talking to the screen. So the problem I see with a lot of this talk about immigration, about, simply opening borders for workers and migrant workers is that yes, it is the most logical economic strategy, and it also supplements for the lost birth rates, right? That's the subject of this video. But there's a lot to do with this that I'm not really so sure about, and is sort of why I have these sort of ethical questions about whether or not countries deserve to have their unique ethnicity. And that's because a lot of countries, unlike America, aren't actually homogenous, right? Countries, even like Finland, in America, a lot of us take it for granted how good we have it here when it comes to the function of the melting pot and etc. But it's important to remember that this isn't the case all around the world. And to simply will upon other countries that immigration would be a good thing for them is insensitive to the actual circumstances they find themselves in. In here in America, what is just another immigrant? We already have such a blended culture. We already have this nature of having immigration, despite anything, what anyone says about Trump right now or whatever. We do have that culture in America. But in places like South Korea, part of its history, right, is it's the fact that it's, not China, the fact that it's exclusive, the fact that it's a, one people. It's if you want to look at the actual definition for the way Koreans write their country name, right? It's one nation and one people, right? The one Korean people. And obviously they're going through a lot of struggles right now as a nation, and it is one remedy to propose immigration. Is it right to simply go and say that, for economic reasons, go and abandon your entire ethnic heritage, right? Just lose your race within 100 years, right? Is this a logical or even ethical thing to do? And that's one of my main questions with whether or not this is something we could solve immigration-wise. You may have noticed something very interesting. It's that one thread links all of these declining populations. Modernity. Birth rates aren't dropping in war zones or famine-stricken areas. They're plummeting in cities, in wealth, in peace. With high education, career focus, individualism, and digital connections, all things that are supposed to elevate the human experience. The new social contract of modernity offers one potential cause: the proliferation of individuality and autonomy, which both elevate the individual experience. The proliferation of said aspects have seen an inversely proportional decrease in their counterparts: collectivism and order. That which gives society purpose, the collective, and that which gives society function, order, were both weakened, resulting in a directionless world. Somewhere in this transition, the incentives for the most cardinal need of all, reproduction, were eliminated. Now that we've covered the basics, we can now discuss Calhoun's work, which is surprisingly relevant even in today's world. In this utopian rat society where food, water, and space were all provided, something still went wrong. The rats withdrew, stopped reproducing, and the entire colony collapsed. He coined this phrase a behavioral sink. Could modern societies be facing a human version of it? In July 1968, John B. Calhoun created a rat utopia called Universe 25, an installation of a series of similar experiments, spaced with unlimited food, water, and shelter. The population grew rapidly, doubling every 55 days, peaking at 2,200 rats. But then, something strange happened. Despite there being no shortages, birth rates collapsed, social behaviors broke down, and violence and isolation became widespread. By day 600, reproduction had stopped entirely. And eventually, the entire population died out, despite perfect conditions. But what was it that characterized this downfall? Rats, believe it or not, have society. And in this unique circumstance they found themselves in, they found themselves unable to adapt. Female mice became more aggressive, often neglecting their children or failing to raise them properly. Droves of mice became delinquent or socially ostracized, becoming depressed or even violent. Cannibalism was common. Alpha mice dominated the sexual marketplace. So-called beautiful ones lived without purpose, simply taking care of their base needs. Does any of this sound familiar? I'll let you decide. Welcome back to the real world, and I brought you here to talk more about more real world issues when it comes to politics, because there's a lot of ways we can solve this, right? I don't think, I described it as a cancer earlier, and I don't think there's, one solution fits all, so I think each country will have to do its own, so I'll be talking about America. Before we get into that, I want to first say that a lot of people have had problems with Calhoun's experiments, right? A lot of it's because it hasn't been replicated. He did it and no one else has replicated it. And I think this is due to a multitude of reasons, really. One thing could definitely be, is it ethical? Is doing this kind of experiment to mice or rats actually ethical? After all, we know that all of these populations collapsed, right? Also, of course, there's some issue of cost, and we want to do it again. But ultimately, it is interesting that it hasn't been replicated before, and I would be interested in seeing a redo of it with a modern interpretation and a different lens on it. Let's get into the political ideas, right? So, in America, there's two sides, right? Left and right, which are represented by the Democratic and Republican Party. And of these, there's a very interesting split I found. On one side, this issue that I talk about is mostly talked about by right-wing, not fundamentalists, but right-wing figures, right? Elon Musk has said this before, but ultimately, the numbers show that everyone who sees this can agree, but this is only being shared by the quote-unquote MAGA hard right, Project 2025, because it allows them to justify furthering their agenda for example, return to quote-unquote traditional values, or maybe women stay home to not work and instead rear children, right? These are solutions to a problem they think exists, and it does exist, right? But this is merely a stepping stone for them to get what they want, which is this quote-unquote return to traditional values, right? On the other hand, this isn't talked about a lot in left-wing circles, and that's because of the conflicting interests, right? You have different priorities. On one side, from the right wing, you have, of course, this, population collapse, all of these things. Then you have the other doomsday event, which is being foretold and is more focused on the left, which is climate change, right? Environmental change, that no matter what, we're going to all die from climate-related issues should this continue. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it, especially because these two ways are equally terrible ways to go out as a civilization, right? So it's a matter of what you prioritize. But the general consensus for everyone who takes a look at this issue does seem to be economics, right? Can we make it so young families are actually incentivized to have children? Part of this is, I think, missing the point. It's that the current situations, like with urbanization, as we talked about in Utopia, is that even if you have this prosperity, people aren't going to choose to have children due to a, bevy of sociological, psychological issues. And I think that's the much bigger concern to be talked about here, right? Can we actually compel people non-economically to have children, right? Because children born just for economic tax breaks aren't actually going to do that well, right? Maybe they're not going to be loved. Maybe their parents don't have time for them. All of these different issues. And for that reason, I think that there's a lot of different interesting proposals, but ultimately none of them really hit the mark quite right. Maybe the question isn't whether the world has too many people, but whether it has enough connection, enough meaning, enough reason to keep going. In all of this chaos, there must be a silver lining, right? There is. Unlike the rats in Calhoun's experiment, we are human. Despite our most basic nature, we have the ability to think, to plan, to reason, and that is why we mustn't give up hope. Not yet.